Canada has just launched heavy tariffs on the US, directly targeting the energy sector. Is Washington ready to face the consequences as fuel prices skyrocket and the economy shakes? Dependence on Canada is no longer an advantage, it is a strategic weakness. Canada has just launched a strong retaliation against the US in the energy sector, a move that could shock the economy and push up fuel prices. As the main supplier, exporting about 4 million barrels of oil a day to the US, equivalent to 10% of the country's total crude oil needs, any disruption from Canada would create a severe shock. Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced a 25% fee on electricity exports to the United States will take effect Monday, pushing costs directly onto consumers. Michigan, New York, and Minnesota, states that rely heavily on Canadian energy, will feel the impact the most, from higher electricity bills to supply disruptions. When oil prices increase by 10 to 20%, inflation will escalate, making the cost of living increasingly expensive. These moves force the US to face a difficult reality. Dependence on energy from its northern neighbor is becoming a weakness in economic policy. President Trump called this a hostile act and threatened to respond with tariffs on Canadian goods, but that was just a simple reaction. While the US has no clear alternative, Canada is looking towards a more independent future. Under the leadership of Mark Carney, Canada not only protects its domestic economy, but also sets its ambition to become an energy superpower. By increasing domestic production, reducing dependence on the US, and expanding trade relations with Europe and Asia, Ottawa is shaping a long-term strategy, escaping Washington's influence. This tension is not just a trade confrontation but could change the global economic landscape. If the US does not find a way to adapt soon, it could face an energy and financial crisis more serious than ever. This conflict could have profound impacts on energy prices, consumers, and world markets. What will happen next? Please follow to update the latest information. The US stock market just lost $5 trillion in just 3 weeks, a huge blow to the economy. Prices soared, wages stagnated, while Trump supporters still hailed this as a golden age. But Bill Maher is not fascinated by that illusion. He exposed the reality. Trump doesn't run the economy, he manipulates it, just like he did with his businesses. Let's look back. Airlines failed. Trump University closed due to fraud. Casinos went bankrupt 6 times. Who could lose money in the gambling industry? Trump's approach to the economy is no different. In just 4 years, the national debt increased by $7.8 trillion, markets fluctuated wildly, and workers saw no real wage growth. Even so, Trump still claims this is the greatest economy in history, while millions of Americans are struggling with rising costs of living. In 2017, Trump promised tax cuts would help the middle class, but the truth is different. 83% of the tax cuts went to the richest 1%. Corporate taxes fell from 35% to 21%. But companies didn't raise wages, they used the tax savings to buy back shares, enriching the super rich like Jeff Bezos. Meanwhile, the middle class is still stuck, except that the cost of living is getting more expensive. Maher likened Trump's trade war to burning down a house and called it a heating strategy. Trump promised to protect American jobs, but tariffs hurt farmers, pushing up business costs and causing prices to skyrocket. Millions of Americans pay the price, while Trump still denies the consequences. GDP under Trump only increased by 2.3%, lower than 2.9% under Obama, while the stock market evaporated $5 trillion in just 3 weeks. The national debt jumped from $19.9 trillion to $27.7 trillion. But Trump kept repeating, "Amazing, amazing, best ever." Maher did not hesitate to counter. If your economy only benefits billionaires and hedge funds, then maybe it's not as great as you think. And as Canada poses a major challenge to the United States, perhaps it is time for Washington to face reality. Delusional policies cannot hide the truth of a fracturing economic reality. When Trump imposed tariffs on Canada, he not only targeted goods but also directly attacked key industries. The 250% tariff on milk and 50% tariff on steel and aluminum not only puts Canada in trouble, but also puts American consumers and businesses in a difficult position. Goods become more expensive, but will Canada stand still? Ontario immediately counterattacked. Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, announced to cut off power supply to the U.S. if tensions continue. This is no empty threat. Ontario supplies 25% of the energy to the Northeast United States. Once the power supply is cut off, thousands of American businesses and households will be immediately affected. If Canada chooses to use this leverage, the crisis will not be limited to trade but will also spread to the energy sector, disrupting the lives of millions of Americans. But Ontario doesn't stop there. The province also canceled a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink, a move that has both economic and political significance. Musk, who studied in Canada, is now turned away by this country because he sided with Trump. This is not just a business decision, it sends a clear message. Canada is willing to sacrifice economic interests to protect its country. And Canada still has another weapon: minerals. Ontario supplies nearly half of the nickel the United States needs to produce cars and technology equipment. If Canada restricts exports, U.S. factories will struggle, forcing Washington to return to the negotiating table. This is no longer just a tariff war, it has become a war for strategic resource control. Meanwhile, Tesla is one of the biggest victims of Trump's tariff policy. Shares fell 45%, sales in China plunged 50%, and in Europe they fell 29% due to rising costs. With Tesla heavily reliant on the global supply chain, the new tariffs caused production costs to explode, slowing deliveries and causing investor panic. As a result, the price of Tesla cars increased by $5,000 to $10,000, while more than 12,000 jobs in the electric vehicle industry in Texas, California, and New York are under threat. Ordinary Americans are paying the price for misguided economic policy, with cars, whether electric or gasoline, further out of reach. This is not just a trade war, but a widespread economic crisis. And this time, it is the people Trump promised to protect who will suffer the most. The U.S. government has thrown the North American economy into chaos with its decision to impose 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada. In the name of protecting the domestic manufacturing industry, this policy is actually strangling the supply chain, increasing prices and pushing thousands of workers into unemployment. When more than 80% of Mexico's exports go to the U.S., the reaction from the neighboring country is not only drastic but also strategic. The auto industry, the backbone of the Mexican economy, is suffering the heaviest losses, with the risk of chain collapse spreading across the region. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum does not accept standing still in the face of this imposition. She led a large demonstration in Zocalo Square, where tens of thousands of Mexicans showed strong opposition. But Mexico doesn't stop at protests. For several weeks, the country's government has intensified negotiations with the White House, forcing the U.S. government to make concessions by postponing tariffs until April 2nd. This is a significant step backward for Washington, showing that Trump's tough policy not only harms Mexico but also shakes the U.S. economy. Meanwhile, Tesla, the symbol of American electric vehicle technology, is falling into a serious crisis. Component prices are skyrocketing, production is disrupted, and most importantly, customer loyalty is declining. Under pressure from high car prices and poor service, the percentage of returning Tesla buyers dropped from 72% to 65% in states that tend to favor climate policies, while in conservative states, loyalty remained almost unchanged. More worryingly, 32% of U.S. consumers now say they would never consider buying a Tesla. Meanwhile, competitors from China, Europe, and Korea such as BYD, Volkswagen, and Hyundai are gaining market share with reasonable pricing strategies and advanced technology. Whether Tesla can regain its position depends on its ability to immediately adjust its strategy. If the company doesn't improve pricing, perfect self-driving technology, and restore customer confidence, it will lose its leadership position. The worst thing is that the U.S. government not only failed to help the domestic electric vehicle industry, but also made things more difficult. Instead of boosting production and encouraging innovation, misguided policies have caused America to go backwards, leaving the playing field to international competitors. But the crisis doesn't stop at Tesla or the auto industry. The Dow Jones Index fell more than 700 points, and the peso lost 5% in value, increasing the cost of living and causing further economic instability. Mexico quickly counterattacked by seeking new trade agreements with Brazil, China, and South American countries to reduce its dependence on the U.S. In response to Washington's policies, Mexico imposed tariffs on corn, soybeans, and avocados, key U.S. products. This is a blow to agricultural states like Texas and California, where farmers are already struggling with rising costs. When the tariff suspension period under USMCA ends on April 2nd, the U.S. government will face an important decision: continue the endless trade war or find a compromise to save the economy. If Washington does not back down, North America could fall into a severe recession with widespread consequences. One thing is certain: Trump's protectionist policy is not only counterproductive, but also puts the U.S. in an isolated position in the global market. Will this trade confrontation end in concessions or a full-blown energy crisis? The U.S. can continue its tough policy, but the price to pay will not be small. As North America stands at a crossroads, who really controls the game?